Somebody suggested I should have all the old married folks sit up front for this talk. But, God willing, this evening I hope to accomplish 3 things. First, that we look at marriage in a different, more God-honoring light. Number 2, that we understand that God loves marriage and He has designed us for intimacy. He's designed us to experience that oneness as a foretaste of the future of what He has in store for those that love Him. And number 3, that we're able to recognize and stop in its track the cycle of disaffection that occurs in so many marriages. Now, in introducing this talk on marriage, I want to first establish some ground rules. First of all, while we're focusing on marriage, we must recognize that it is not for everyone. Paul advises the single life devoted to Christ, and Christ ratified that in His life. Number 2, when we talk of the principles and ideas of marriage, we're talking about perfection, unity, and harmony that none of us can attain with 100% in this fallen state that we exist in. This, however, does not allow us to decrease the standards one bit. And number 3, when I'm mentioning issues and problems in marriage, I am not pointing the finger or focusing on this couple or that couple. That is not my intent. None of our marriages are the ideal, and they cannot be, because marriage is not the ultimate. Marriage is a type. It's a shadow of something far greater, held out for us in the future. The Bible does not say that Christ and the ecclesia is a type of marriage. He puts it the other way around. Marriage is a type. Even the most beautiful and harmonious marriages are but a small, imperfect type of what He has in store for us in the future. Now, this morning we discussed the triangular theorem of love. Most movies and magazines and articles you read are dealing with this first side of the triangle, the fleshly side, the erotic side. Most of the teachings that come from our platforms in teaching the truth emphasizes the bottom part of the triangle, that love is a way of thinking. It's a decision that we make, and we can decide where we place our affections. That love is a way of thinking, which results in certain behavioral patterns that we expect from people who are in the truth. So I'm going to start this talk on this aspect of love, the agape love. But I'm going to quickly move into the third side of the triangle, and that is the emotional side, the emotional needs of love. So first of all, love and marriage is a very important aspect of God's dealing with us. When Christ was asked about marriage in Matthew 19, He did not quote what God said about marriage. When they asked him about marriage, instead of quoting what God said, he told them what God did. And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them in the beginning made them male and female? And he said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Therefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. When they were not satisfied with his answer and questioned about Moses allowing for divorce, he said that from the beginning it was not that way. They were made one. Divorce was introduced because, he says, of the hardness of your hearts. And Malachi, the prophet Malachi, delivers the same strong message. He says that the Jews were covering the altars with tears. They were weeping and praying to God and offering their sacrifices. And God wasn't hearing them. There was no avail. He says, and ye say, wherefore? Or how come? How come God doesn't hear us? What's happening? Malachi says, Because the Lord hath been a witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet she is thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. Okay? The reason you're having these problems, God sees the way you're treating your spouse. I don't care how many gifts you're bringing to the altar and your prayers and your tears. I see the way you're treating your spouse. And then he goes on and does the same thing that Christ did when he discussed marriage. He goes right back to the creation. He says, And did not he make one? Yet had he the residue of the Spirit. God made them one. It says, Yet he had residue of the Spirit. He had Spirit left over. He didn't run out of Spirit when he made one, and then he ran out. Sorry, Adam, that's all the Spirit I have left. That's who you're stuck with. I ran out of Spirit. Malachi says, no, that's not why he made one. He had the residue of the Spirit. He could have made many more. So he goes on and explains. He says, And wherefore one? Why did he only make one? That he might seek a godly seed. Wherefore, take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. God's purpose with the earth is to people it with a race that will bring honor and glory to him. That's the whole purpose of marriage. It's not for self. It's to bring up a godly seed, godly children, godly grandchildren, godly ecclesias, a spiritual living, spiritual example of God's purpose, of what this earth is all about. He's created it for his glory. That is our purpose in marriage. And if it is, then what a wonderful and happy marriage we will have. Marriage is sacred ground. God ordained it, he loves it, and he gets pleasure out of our pleasure. God ordained human beings to be social creatures. He said, It is not good for man to be alone. We are hardwired for intimacy. When our love bucket gets empty, we don't feel very good. That's the way we are made as human beings. That's the way God created us. We're hardwired for intimacy. That's why solitary confinement is considered cruel and unusual punishment. It's a severe punishment to put somebody alone by themselves. We don't like that. It goes against our nature. It's the heart of our existence to be intimate, to be loved, and to love. God calls both man and woman to submit, to yield their lives to God and to one another as a sign of that covenanted bond that He has made with us. God is interested in making your marriage work for His glory. It's a three-party relationship. Male, female, both committed to each other and both committed to God. Marriage is not give and take, but one must be able to give and to give and to give and to give, all to the glory of God. Divorce says, I don't think God can help us resolve this, so I'll go and solve it my own way. You know, I married the wrong person. Yep, you're right. You did. We all did. There's nobody perfect. It's not about marrying the perfect person. It's about commitment. Commitment to God and commitment to each other. That's what that bottom part of the triangle is all about. Love will not make it work. God will. God ordained a marriage, and He will sustain that marriage if that marriage is God-centered. The simple message that God gives when He ordained marriage is, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Woven together. Paul says, knit together in love. So in this verse we have three aspects of marriage, and I want you to understand the three aspects of marriage in this verse. Leave, cleave, weave. And a successful marriage takes all three. The leaving, the cleaving, and the weaving. To leave father and mother means just that. It doesn't mean we cease to love them or respect them or honor them, but if a new bond is going to be formed, the old one must give way. When we choose a mate, it decreases our choices in life. They say a wedding band will cut off your circulation. We say we leave all others and choose you alone. It's a psychological, it's an emotional, as well as physical and geographic leaving. Okay? Unpack all your baggage and you start over on a new life. Complete leaving. And then there's cleave. That means to be glued together. When I think of gluing something together, I remember in high school, I was in wood shop, and I took two boards, and I glued them together, and I put them in the vise, and I left them in the vise overnight. When I came back to the shop in the morning, I realized I had glued the boards together wrong. So I got a chisel, I put the board in the vise, and I started to chisel right along the glue line. And I chiseled down a little bit, and I took the chisel once it got wedged in there, and I pulled the boards apart. And the fibers of the board came apart before that bond could be broken. It didn't break along the bond that I made. The very fibers of the board pulled itself apart before it gave up that bond. That's cleaving. That word means to glue. It means to transfer your primary loyalty in life, not to yourself anymore, but to your spouse. And the results of leaving and cleaving will be weaving, becoming one flesh. And that will involve all three aspects of the triangle as I spoke of this morning. Sexually, emotionally, mentally. We're told, and they were both naked, and they were not ashamed. They were intimate without fear. We're told, perfect love casteth out fear. You're intimate. There's nothing you hide from your mate. Yet this is not what we see in most marriages. Nearly 50% of today's marriages end in divorce. And if you count those who separate without getting a divorce, now you're at 2/3. And yet even that 1/3 that stays together, even in those couples behind closed doors, there's often profound sorrow, loneliness, and hurt. But even some of God's chosen servants struggled with marital problems. We think of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Hosea, to name just some of them. God has designed us for intimacy with Himself and with our spouse. But due to our fallenness, we are destined to fail in our relationships, including marriage. But I firmly believe that God is able and that it is His desire to help us to overcome our relationship failures and to go the distance in marriage. Let's look at a typical marriage. Most marriages start off with their rose-colored glasses on. We interpret everything's positive, everything's wonderful, and we enjoy laughing at the most foolish mistakes we make. But then everyday pressures tear at love. Unremitting and unresolved stress, the daily hassles that pile up day after day after day without a break, the demands of the workplace, of the family, of the ecclesia, personal concerns, all begin to take their toll. And marital drift begins to take place in this time-starved world that we live in. But a drifting relationship is a failing relationship. It is a contradiction to God's design for marriage, with its closeness and with its intimacy. Drifting is a gradual, subtle, unintentional severing of the emotional ties in marriage. And its danger lies in the fact that it's so gradual and so subtle. Having children is one of God's greatest blessings, and it can bring feelings of love and joy never previously experienced in life. However, research shows that marital dissatisfaction increases. Marital satisfaction significantly decreases after the first child is born. Couples are often unprepared for the challenges that arise during this transition. They frequently underestimate the impact that raising children will have on their marriage. If we were to take a graph and graft our daily activities on a timeline, we have so much time for work, so much time for eating, so much time for sleeping. Most newlywed couples spend a good chunk of their time with each other. That's why they got married. They wanted to be together. And there's a good chunk of their time that they spend together when they're first married. But when a child comes into the picture, time must get redistributed. And research indicates that for 2 years after the birth of the first child, the role of spouse is what's shrunk. And the role of spouse significantly decreases or disappears altogether in their marriage. She's focused on the new baby. She's tired, she's overburdened with the cares of the house. He comes home from work, tired, probably late. He is now concerned about the responsibility of having another member of the family to care for, to support. So he kind of redirects himself on how he's going to be able to deal with that problem and focus on his job more. Both feel tired and neglected. Both are hurting for intimacy, but they're both too tired and too busy to recognize the seriousness of what is happening to them. They justify it as just a temporary phase that they'll get through. But it doesn't get easier. And other factors begin to play into this drift that is now started in the marriage. Both begin to see themselves as having the worst part of the deal. And insensitivity sets in. Loneliness and emotional distances following. And dissatisfaction with the relationship and each other becomes apparent. This leads to anger and resentment. And finally, if not turned around, it ends in disaffection. You know, I really don't love him or her anymore. It happens. It's the reality of life we live in. Negative thinking develops as conflict and anger builds up over time. Negative thinking begins to ascribe bad motives and intentions to their mate. We then confirm what we're thinking by picking up on the negatives and ignoring the positives. And we add to this the gender gap. You know, I don't know if it's still a popular concept, but men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We use the same words, but they mean different things. And so we hear different things being said. When a woman says, you know, we never go out much anymore, he responds angrily, yes, we do. We went out just last week. We see on Venus, what she was saying was, I feel like going out. I feel like doing something together. We always have such fun. I love going out with you. What do you think? Why don't we go out for dinner tonight? It's been a few days since we went out. But on Mars, when he hears we never go out anymore, what it means is you're not doing your job. What a disappointment you've turned out to be. We never do anything together anymore because you're such a lazy, unromantic, and just plain boring person. Same words, two different things heard and said. Marital satisfaction is more a function of how one perceives and interprets the behavior of their spouse rather than the behavior itself. Negative thinking is one of the major risk factors that determine whether or not a marriage can even survive. Many people at this stage recognize they have a problem, and they seek help from marriage counselors, or they start reading self-help books. Many times this leads to further downhill progression. The danger is to offer pat solutions and action-oriented techniques rather than getting to the root of the relationship problem. Techniques are excellent. They're good in the right place at the right time. But they will not work until there's a fundamental change in the mindset. When people are having problems and they try techniques like, well, try talking out your problems, they're more likely to end up in a fight than they are in resolving any differences. They're still critical and defensive, two mindsets that must be eliminated from the relationship before healing can take place. But now they've raised their expectation. They went to the counselor, they've read the books, and they've raised their expectations. And when that doesn't work, they're more convinced than ever that the marriage isn't going to work. It's not workable. These people are in pain, and they're unaware or they're underaware of what is happening to them. All they know is they still love their spouse, but every time they say or do something, it ends in hurt. It ends in pain. One person asked, I wonder why God hates divorce when marriage can be so painful. When you get hurt, you withdraw. When you withdraw, your marriage drifts further. Now, withdrawal in itself is not wrong. It's a natural response to pain. If you were to take my hand and put it in a fire, I'm going to withdraw. Nothing to do with you. I respond to the pain. It's a natural response. It's a natural reaction that we have as human beings. God intended us for intimacy, and nothing hurts worse than failure. Maybe our spouse is responding to brokenness. Maybe he or she is hurting just as much as we are. And it's the pain and it's the frustration of the hurt that we see and we feel, and not hostility to us. We need to recognize our call to a spiritual task. We're told to be reconciled to God and to one another. Older sisters are instructed to teach the young sisters to love their husbands, to love their children. You say, what? Isn't that natural? If it's so natural, then why are there so many problems in marriages and in families? Living so closely to someone day after day, you will step on each other's toes from time to time. A mechanism is needed to heal the breach. Let's look at some positive, constructive aspects. I will deal with two important aspects of marriage in the time left. Number one, how to fight. Number two, how to love. Very interesting research has been done. Research on couples who consider themselves happily married and on those couples who are unhappy in their marriage. And they found that both of these groups argued and fought. It was not if they argued, but how they argued that made the difference. Researchers claim that they can predict with over 90% accuracy if a marriage will last, not by if the couple argue and fight, but how they do that. I used to tell my kids, fight nice. In debate classes, we learn that to win a debate, you use certain techniques. One may be to discredit your opponent, make their argument appear irrelevant. Statements like, that's ridiculous, or you don't understand. That may win arguments with your opponent, but it has no place in a marital relationship. Never devalue your mate. Let me put that in a positive way. Always honor, always esteem your mate. I don't care what the issue may be or how strongly you feel about that issue. Disagree if you must, but always show your mate that you still love and respect and value them as a person, and that you would never do anything on purpose to ever hurt or dishonor them, even if you do not agree on this issue. The message is, you can be safe with me because I love you. That is intimacy. There are certain things that must be avoided at all times. One researcher calls them the 4 apocalyptic forces of marriage. Number 1, criticism. Criticism is destructive in a marriage. It cannot be allowed into an argument. Every home needs to outlaw criticism. If you have a complaint, complain, but don't criticize. Criticism begins with you. You did or you didn't. If something must be discussed, you should do it from your personal perspective. Begin with I. I feel disappointed and frustrated when I attempt to balance the account and the ATM slips are not there. Okay, it's how I feel, not blaming the other person. The second horse, defensiveness. It is usually a protective mechanism to criticism, but it exacerbates the problem. Defensiveness gives the message, I'm not listening to you. I don't care what you think or how you feel. Being defensive does not resolve problems. Your mate will feel that the message did not get through and will try language a little stronger and a little louder next time, so maybe you'll get the message. I tried nicely and humbly the first time, and you didn't get it. So now I'll try again. Admit what you did. No one's perfect. Acknowledge honestly and humbly your inadequacies to your spouse. Can you trust your spouse with this? Or are you afraid that they're going to use it in the next argument against you? Can you trust your spouse with your intimate feelings? Are you intimate with your spouse? Does your marriage have that agape love? The next horse is contempt. Contempt is toxic to a relationship. It's criticism with the attempt to hurt, to belittle, to put down the person. It's used both offensively and defensively in arguments. It cannot be tolerated in marriage. Sometimes attempt at humor is shown contempt in the form of jokes. It may get laughs out of people, but at what cost to your relationship and your marriage? Don't go there. It's not worth it even in fun. Always honor, always respect your mate in all you say and do. Never devalue them, even in humor. It's not worth the cost. The fourth horse is stonewalling. It's shutting your spouse out. It says, no more. I've been hurt enough. You've hurt me too many times. I call it having an affair. It may or may not be another person in the relationship, but something else takes position number one in your life. It can be focusing on the kids, on work, TV, alcohol, computer, Facebooks, games, even Bible study. Some of these things may be considered good, right, but they're destructive and disastrous to a marriage if it's done to escape your spouse. So how do you turn things around? How do we show love and honor? Create a zone of safety and begin to build a reconstructed marriage. Move from, I am convinced that he or she is wrong, to maybe we have both failed at love. Don't be demoralizing. Let your spouse know that you love them, that you honor and value them. You can be safe with me, and I will do everything I can not to hurt you, because I love you. Ask yourself this question: is my spouse a better person because of me? What is it like to be married to me? So how do you show honor? I'll give you an example. You all know Kelly, my daughter-in-law. She works at a doctor's office. She said, uh-oh, what's coming? She works at a doctor's office, has worked there a lot of years, because the story I'm going to tell is when James was about 2 years old. She was working at the doctor's office, and Kathy would go over to the office and wait for her to come. She would bring James, and Kathy would babysit for James. And when Kelly brought him into the office, she would set him down. He'd look around. He'd see her sitting over there, big smile on his face, hold out his hands, and go running across the room to her. People would say, oh, how cute that is to see that little kid do that. James didn't speak when he was 2 years old, but he didn't need to speak. He was sending a very powerful, clear, loud message. There's someone in this room I value. There's somebody here that is important to me. Do our actions send this message to our spouse? Do we truly value them? Healthy relationships are a byproduct of what we say and do. But sometimes, because men are from Mars and women are from Venus, we misinterpret and we misunderstand. When God wanted to disrupt the building of the Tower of Babel, he confounded their language so they could no longer cooperate and work together as a unit. Each of us speak a primary language. We may learn another language, but we feel most comfortable in our native language. If we speak only English and we're trying to communicate with someone who speaks only Chinese, we have a problem. All we can do is motion and grunt and groan and point, but we can't effectively communicate. To effectively communicate, we would have to learn Chinese. So I said I'd finish up with how to love. The rule is love your spouse in your spouse's language. Many people attempt to love their spouse, but they fail to communicate because they speak a different love language. And they've never learned how to express their love so that it is understood by their spouse. Lovers many times do not speak the same love language, and so their love buckets feel empty. People go to marriage counselors, not because they're not loved, but because they do not feel loved. Their buckets feel empty because they do not speak the same love language as their spouse. And their attempts to communicate love are disregarded or rejected. And this causes withdrawal and marital drift. Researchers have defined 5 basic love languages. What is your spouse's love language? What is your love language? The first language is words of affirmation. Words build up. You look nice in that suit. That was a good meal you cooked today. We're told love edifies. Proverb 18 says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. You say, well, those words don't come easy for me. I'm just not that kind of a person. Good. Excellent, as a matter of fact. Now when you say them to your spouse will know that they're not just words that just rolled off your lips. That you said that because you love them. Because you value them. Don't hesitate to say, I love you. A woman once told her husband that she didn't feel loved anymore. She says, you never tell me that you love me. He says, I told you I loved you when we got married. If anything changes, I'll let you know. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. Language number 2, quality time. You know, when Jesus preached to the multitude, healing the sick, and yet every so often we're told that he went alone with his disciples. He got away. The language is clear. I value you. Yes, I understand the work of preaching and healing and what we're doing is very important. But let's take some time off and get away just for ourselves. Let's just be together. Do the readings together. A family that prays together stays together. And the same goes for the readings. It's family time. Time to discuss things that come up in the readings. Problems, issues, quiet time together. Go for a walk with each other. Talk to each other. If your spouse's language is time together, you can give them all the compliments in the world. But the message that they will hear is, I really don't have time for you. I have no interest in spending time with you. Talk is cheap, you know? Know your spouse's love language. The third language is gifts. God so loved the world that he gave. God loves, God gives. It's a powerful language. You know those pesky dandelions that grow in the yard in the spring that we try to get rid of? Watch the transformation that a dandelion makes. When a 3-year-old picks it and brings it in for mommy, that pesky dandelion is taken, put in a vase in the center of the table with water, and it's kept there on the table until it's died. The monetary value of that is irrelevant. It's not even part of the consideration. The message delivered was clear. You're important to me. I got this for you because I love you. Look at any mother's or grandmother's refrigerator with the magnets and all the things stuck on the refrigerator. The value of the art is irrelevant. It's not important. I drew this for you. Gifts can be a very powerful message. The fourth language, acts of service. James tells us, my little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. If your mate's love language is acts of service, be aware of it. Sure, he buys me all kinds of things, but if he really loved me, he would take off his shoes at the door, or vacuum the rug once in a while, or whatever. Well, she says she loves me, but she makes me do my own laundry. Talk is cheap, you know. Learn to communicate in your mate's love language so that they will get the message. The last language, physical touch. Talking about holding hands, kissing, placing your hand on your spouse's shoulder, talking about running your hand through their hair, a warm embrace. Jesus rebuked the disciples when they did not want him to place his hands on the children. It's a token of love. It can send a powerful message if that is your spouse's love language. Unfortunately, most people attempt to love their mate in their own language rather than in their spouse's language. They run their finger through their mate's hair as an act of affection and are rebuffed. They're messing up my hair. This is interpreted as rejection. I don't love you. I value my hair more than I value you. That may not be what was intended, but that's the message delivered. Learn to communicate in your spouse's love language. And when the first few years have passed and you come off the highs of the tingles and the rose-colored glasses and the love bucket begins to start feeling a bit empty, you cannot fill it up if you do not speak a language that your spouse understands, or it's much more difficult to communicate them if they don't understand the language. Once that love bucket is full, then you can sprinkle the other 4 languages around and enjoy the most intimate, happy, and rewarding relationship that 2 people can ever experience. A relationship that brings pleasure to all 3 parties, to God, to the man, and to the woman.